Welcome back to another Reddit readings video. Sit back, relax, and enjoy these personal creepy stories. My stepbrother taught me a 4-letter word. What's a door? I asked my mom. She had always towered over me. And even after I hit my teenage years, I'd never come close to catching up with her height. She looked surprised at the question, indignant and angry. Where did you hear that nasty word? She snapped, getting red in the face. I didn't know what to say. It was obvious where I'd heard it from. But I pretended to act stupid and told her I wasn't sure. She stormed off, her feet stomping across the wooden floorboards. Tom, what did I tell you about using that dirty word? That dirty, foul, nasty word, my stepbrother yelled and screamed as she dragged him across the single large room towards the bathtub, his fingernails scraping across the wooden floor as he clawed and scratched desperately to get away. Then she began to fill the tub with scalding water. We need to rinse that mouth out with soap, and then we'll get you clean again. So clean, everything will be clean. The screams went on for a while, and that horrible abrasive brushing sound as she scrubbed him in the hot water until his skin was raw and bleeding in pinpoint spots. Then she dried him off with the towel, her eyes moist with tears. Tom just looked down at the floor, shaking and terrified. It was for your own good. You're clean now, Tom, just like you're meant to be. She bent down and embraced him in a bear hug, squeezing him until his bones creaked and he let out a little cry of pain. Then she finally let him go. Okay, sweetie, she said, looking at me. It's your turn to get clean now. Later that night, the three of us went to bed together, all squished onto the small mattress as always. There had been more room before Tom arrived, but I was happy for his company. Even if he was miserable, at least it wasn't just me and Mommy anymore. Those days before Tom had been the worst. Her full attention was always solely on me, her potent rage and her affection, and all of her insecurities. After a while, Mommy began to snore, and Tom and I pretended to do the same. Once she was certain we were asleep, she got up and went over to the furthest wall of the room. Her fingers traced a path along the wallpaper seam and she began to pull it back very carefully. I watched through mostly closed eyelids as she exposed the tall, rectangular shape behind the wallpaper. A soft click could be heard and a moment later she was gone. I couldn't believe it. Mommy was actually gone. Tom jumped up from the bed and took me by the hand, leading me over to it. He lifted my hand towards the seams of the strange shape and looked at me with his red, bleeding face. That, he said, is a door. We stood in front of it, just staring at it for a while. Both of us were silent, but Tom seemed to be looking for something with his keen eyes scanning up and down. How does it work? I asked. What does it do? Tom said the door would change everything, but what that meant I still didn't know. When he tried to explain it to me, his words had become difficult to understand. Phrases and things that I couldn't comprehend came tumbling out of his mouth in a rambling whisper. Mommy slept more and more lately, and now I was beginning to understand why. She was using the door to leave us, to abandon us. But to go where? There should be a handle, a knob, something to make it open. Tom was running his fingers along the seams of the door now, trying to feel for something. Go get me a knife from the kitchen, will you? I hesitated. But we're not supposed to touch the knives. Mommy will know. She always knows. He turned to look at me and I saw how desperate he was at that moment. He was barely containing his emotions. Please, help me. If I'm right about this, we won't have to worry about what she does when she gets back. Okay, I didn't argue any further, instead running to the kitchen and grabbing a butter knife, the flattest, strongest one you can find. He whispered, nothing flimsy. My eyes settled on one of the knives and I pulled it from the drawer, bringing it over to him. He took it in his hands for a moment, examining its edge. Then he inserted it into the space between the door and the frame, gently wiggling and prying. At first it didn't move. It stayed stubbornly locked in place. Oh no, what? I didn't even think she might put a lock on the other side. But she might have, and if she did, what? I persisted. Nothing, he said, his face red with effort, his arms flexing and shaking with the strain of all of his energy. Just give me a second. I think it's starting to move. The progress was imperceptible at first, then it was only budging by a millimeter at a time. But soon it was an inch, and then it was swinging free, revealing a small, barely visible gap. A chain which locked the door from the other side could be seen holding it closed. A 2-inch gap was now open, revealing a dusty, dark staircase leading upwards. Tom burst into tears, falling to his knees and dropping the knife to the floor where it landed with a loud clang. I was completely in awe. Seeing the stairs, just seeing something new was incredible. Something different from the same 4 walls I had been staring at since I was born. Putting my eyeball right up to the gap, I took it in desperately. I felt like someone who had just escaped the desert getting their first taste of water. "Gamnet," Tom shouted, no longer seeming to care who heard him. "Quiet. What if she's still here?" "She's not. She went to work." "What's work?" I asked, not understanding this new word. "To her job." "How do you not know this stuff? Has she really got you this brainwashed?" He shouted, now sounding like he was angry with me for my stupidity and ignorance. "Out there you have to work to earn money. Money is how you get food and clothes and things like that. Her money must have run out, and that's why she can't stay in here all the time anymore. She's gotta force herself to go outside into the germs." "Don't say that word," I yelled, covering my ears. "Just the word could hurt you badly, but not as bad as actual germs." Something I didn't even want to think about running into. Then it occurred to me, germs would be everywhere if we went past the door. Mommy had always told us this place was special, that we were safe here, but I never really understood there was an alternative to here. For my entire life I thought this was all there was. "She can't hear us. She's far away from here." "Okay, she just knows how to scare you and keep you scared. That's why I'm trying to help you. Are you sure?" He rolled his eyes and I could tell he was getting annoyed by my questions again. So I stayed quiet for a minute to let him think. "We need something long and narrow and heavy. Maybe we can break the lock." His eyes were searching the room for something which fit that description, but there was nothing immediately obvious. "Help me look." I began looking around the room, trying not to disturb anything. It was difficult, since Mommy had such specific ways of organizing things. All of the items on the bookcase were neatly lined up and arranged alphabetically. The toys in our little cupboard were aligned perfectly like jigsaw puzzle pieces, with barely enough space between items to fit a finger to pry them out for playtime. "What about that?" I asked, my eyes settling on a hammer which Mommy kept up on top of the fridge. If I hadn't known it was there, I wouldn't have seen it. But I knew the contents of our little home extremely well. For my entire life I'd stared at nothing but the people and things in this single room. "That's perfect," Tom yelled, trying to climb up onto the cupboards. "Here, give me a boost." I stood behind him and cupped my hands, making an improvised step ladder out of them. Then he began to climb. All the while I was watching the stairs out of the corner of my eye, hoping she wouldn't return. If she did, I could only imagine what she would do. Probably the collar again, or the paddle, maybe both. Tom got up on the counter, then grabbed the hammer from on top of the fridge. After that, he sat down with his legs dangling and began to scrub at the shoe prints he had left, wiping them clean with his shirt sleeve. "Remember how everything looks," he said, "so we can put it back if we have to." I nodded, looking around the room and trying to fix everything so that it was just how it had always been. Tom walked over to the door and stood on his toes, trying to reach up high enough so that he could swing the hammer and bring it down on the chain lock. "Okay, here goes," he said, taking a deep breath. "Let's hope this works." He swung the hammer with all of the force he could muster, bringing it down into the gap between the door and the frame, where the chain lock was dangling. The first swing of the hammer hit the door frame and bounced off, barely making contact with the chain. The second time was slightly better, but it remained in place, giving no indication of damage. The lock was stronger than it appeared. "Shit," Tom muttered, looking down at his hand. His knuckles were bleeding from where they'd banged off the doorframe. "Tom, you're bleeding." His hands were dripping dark crimson droplets onto the floorboards, and I felt my nerves beginning to crack under the pressure. I kept imagining Mommy coming home at that exact moment and catching us doing what we were doing. If that happened, what would we do? Just as I had that thought, I heard a loud noise outside. What I would come to discover was a car door being slammed shut. We both knew right away what it meant, though. Mommy was home. Her. I've never been one to engage in gossip. It felt pointless. My school isn't abnormally large. It would take days to catch up on gossip from just a week, so I just never paid attention. But some rumors stick around for so long it's inevitable to know the story. At some point it's not gossip. It's common sense. It's a story everyone who goes to my school knows, though anyone outside of the district would see it as silly gossip. But it's not. It's a gut feeling, something that has no real proof. Nothing but the alarms in your head yelling at you to believe the eerie words spoken about her, to stay away from her. Her name was Maeve. She was quiet and timid. She never spoke in class and always kept her head down. No one even believed she had lived here before 8th grade, even if her transcript says otherwise. She was in my math class freshman year and only spoke loud enough for the teacher to hear, having chosen the seat closest to their desk. I don't think I had actually heard her voice until a week before the end of that year. She wasn't well known and didn't have many friends, but she had some. She sat in a corner of the school courtyard with a few other students, Occasionally the others would come and go, but she never sat in another place. Her entire persona was unnerving, unmoving. No one really paid attention to her until a few days before fall break. At first, people were saying that she spoke in class and actually had a full-on conversation loud enough for people to hear. The only reason people really cared was because of how worked up others were over it. How her voice was as sweet as honey, melodic like a piano ballad, their eyes almost white. It was all anyone could talk about for the rest of the day. People searched for her, wanting to hear her voice for themselves, but it seemed as though she disappeared. One of the students who was present to hear her that day had broke up with his girlfriend. 2 others kept jabbering about it, and another actually tried to ask her out. People joked that she had hypnotized them with her voice, but that's all it was. A joke, that's what we told ourselves. Still, I kept my distance. Something about her was off. Then the next day was met with 2 more breakups, and a rather large bouquet of flowers crudely stuffed in her desk. The female students started theorizing that it was just some dumb superiority complex, and the guys were attempting to stake claim now that she was the hot topic. I couldn't help but notice how she had crawled back into her shell, but what I hadn't noticed was how far she had come, until she was back to looking like a broken doll, trying to hold itself together. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I watched her. The way she walked, the way she carried herself, just didn't feel right. A lump formed in my throat, a pounding in my head screaming at me to get away, look away. People started to pity her. Unsolicited affection can only be handled to a certain extent. Her boundaries were more than likely more sensitive than normal. Everyone held a sense of protectiveness over her, giving the Curters a hard time. Things eventually died down, and when fall break started, the whole ordeal was largely disregarded. That was until 2 boys were arrested for harassment, along with breaking and entering. They were identified as Sebastian and Tristan, 2 students who were in Maeve's presence, who heard her speak. The trial was relatively quick. Both had restraining orders and 7 months in juvie. It was startling, but it could never prepare the school for what was about to go down. The night they were meant to be carted off to juvie, they broke out, beelining for Maeve's house. That's where the others were camping out to protect her. 3 people died that night. Tristan and Sebastian themselves were amongst the dead, the third being a student by the name of Andrew. Tristan was beaten to death, while Sebastian and Andrew were shot. The 3 other male students were arrested and put on trial. When school started back up, we were divided. Some saw her as an omen of death, or perhaps a siren, hypnotizing men with her voice. Others thought she was a victim, being aggressively pursued only to be harassed and have 3 boys die on your front lawn. Maeve kept her head down for the rest of the year. I could breathe again. Students then started to bully her, slipping crude notes into her locker, calling her names, and threatening her to never speak to their boyfriends or crushes. Some people comforted and stood up for her, but she never spoke. The teachers never called on her, and she eventually just faded back into the background, whispers and rumors being the only thing that kept her name alive. Then Sam started to follow her around. He just trailed behind her as close as possible. No matter how fast she walked or where she went, he was there. She never spoke up about it, and he never touched her. There was nothing anyone could do about it, not that anyone wanted to. It went on for weeks, just trailing behind, eyes locked on her as if she was the only thing that existed in his world. People started to trade rumors again. How far would this go? When would things start to go wrong? The next thing we knew, search parties were sent out for Sam. He just disappeared. No trace, no leads, nothing. We all knew it, but there was nothing we could say that would be taken seriously. Maeve started showing up with more bruises that week. 3 months ago, a boy committed suicide. His letter was simply a confession to Maeve, telling her how madly in love he was with her, and how he couldn't live if she didn't love him back. The school tried to keep it under wraps, not wanting the backlash that Maeve would inevitably receive to get out of hand. But there was no use. She'd walk into class with bruises and cuts, black eyes and swollen lips. People said she deserved it. Others said it was good that she couldn't seduce anyone else. Some even pitied her. I didn't think any of that. God, I was scared. All I did was stare and wonder why she would let it happen, why she didn't just move away or defend herself. I couldn't help my curiosity. It was 3 days ago when I was running an errand for my teacher and found her wobbling out of the girls' bathroom, blood running down her knees, fresh cuts and bruising. I didn't know what to do. Yet I carried her to the nurse's office and stayed with her until her parents came to pick her up. I felt like I was on autopilot. What was I even thinking? I knew I'd get in trouble, but I couldn't just leave her there. Before she walked out of the nurse's office, She whispered something to me. I heard it, but I didn't understand it until she hesitated. Her breath caught in her throat. She thought for a moment before speaking again. I'm sorry. She was apologizing. It broke my heart how fragile she was. I never understood how people could hurt her, how easily they could just ignore her. She was beautiful. She radiated magnificence. I didn't understand how I was ever scared of her. My God, her voice was heavenly. I knew no one else would understand. They all saw her as a monster or someone who needed pity. I knew better, though. No one deserved her. She was something above us all. She didn't come to school the next day. I bit my nails and scratched myself in worry. It more than just bugged me. I needed to make sure she was okay. I hastily questioned the school nurse on her absence. Oh, you're the boy who brought her in yesterday. She gave a tight smile, her lips pressing into a thin line. Her mom called her in sick today. I felt relieved, but uneasy. Can I call her house? I just want to check up on her. That's all I needed. Just another moment to feel closer to her. The nurse thought for a moment before declining. My throat burned. My head was fuzzy. I needed to see her. I gave a stiff nod and continued on with the day. I asked around to try and find out what bus she was on, what her stop was, until I remembered a girl who once mentioned Maeve only lived a few doors down from her. So I followed her bus to her house. It was easy to spot Maeve's house. It had been ingrained in my brain ever since it was on the news sophomore year. I could spot her window with ease. It almost felt like fate when I noticed the closest tree was so easily climbable. And listen, you have to understand, I know I sound like all those guys who became obsessed with her, but I swear I'm not. I knew her worth. I had wanted to speak to her for so long but was scared. I just didn't deserve to speak to her. No, nobody did. Everyone else held her down, trapped her, undeserving of her presence. No one else could see it, but I could. She never deserved to be tortured like that. So, I'm going to put her out of her misery. I'm doing this for her. I'll be her salvation. She won't need to live like this anymore. I'll be back tomorrow. I took a gold pill to impress a girl at a party. By the morning, I'd seen the afterlife. I'm going to die tonight, not by choice. All influence I may have had over my eventual passing was robbed from me, stolen the moment I took my first hit of morphinema. The drug that kills your soul, a bad week, a tiny gold pill, and a girl who looks one way in the moment and another when you think back on her the next day. That's all it took for my 22 years to crash to a halt. Seems almost funny, doesn't it? An entire person wiped out almost in an instant because of a single bad decision, as I have learned, and you will too. When all said and done, a person really isn't that substantial a thing. I was at the wrong kind of party last night. A friend's acquaintance's birthday or housewarming or something. Found myself in a house off campus in the part of town I'm not local enough to have known to avoid. I'd been buried in Bayesian algorithms and midterm prep. ACA, a metric fuck ton of stress. All week, Friday was met head on. I was already buzzed when we reached the sagging Dutch gambrel. I was fucked up by the time I met Casas. I'll put my cards on the table. I hadn't only been drinking. You can judge. I don't blame you. Mom and Dad would if they knew. And knowing they'd hate me doing it is exactly why I snorted, smoked, or ingested party favors of various kinds when they were available, not to beat around the bush. I was a couple of lines of some far more mainstream and pathetic than morphinema when I broke away from the main herd in the living room. I'd found my way into a back room. Casas was waiting for me in that part of the house party where newly formed couples gravitate to copulate. I was alone, a trespasser mistaking this sacred second living room. I think, at least, for a path to a place to take a piss. Sweat wasn't the only thing I smelled though when I stumbled through the door. Another scent hung on the dimly lit air. So I followed my nose deeper into the darkness. Spinning vision and treacherous feet threatened to impede me as I fought past the inhibition-free revelers exploring one another in various lounge chairs. Casas was all the way at the opposite end of the room, but the smoke from the blunt between her lips steered me true amongst the swirling shadows and bodies. She knew I'd be coming, not by name or face, but by circumstance and purpose. Someone like me always comes. It was the only reason she was there. And I'm sure also the reason my friend's friend's acquaintance swears blind they don't know her. Neither does my friend's friend. My friend, or anyone else I've managed to track down who was there. She doesn't exist on any social media platform or anywhere accessible by a quick Google search. Either. Casas is a pretty specific name. After all, I did a little digging this morning before I gave up hope. I found her in the end, but buried deep. So deep that as mad as it sounds. No, I want to tell you about her first. And about the little gold pill. You'll think I'm insane otherwise. I'm also half hoping that midway through writing this I'll wake up or come down from this incredibly bad trip. I don't think I will though. The itch is too strong for this not to be real. The bruises hurt too much. She told me her name was Casas when I sat down on the couch next to her. Before I'd had a chance to open my mouth and say a word, before I could answer her first question, she fired the next, which was if I wanted to fuck her. I did, but I said no. She was beautiful, I think, at least, but I was drunk and had shoved more than one line of powdered irresponsibility up my nose. Know thyself, right? There's a limit to how messed up I can get before inebriation evolves into impotence. And I'd passed it 4 tequila slammers ago. I told her my name, and that the only thing I wanted to fuck was my brain with as many chemicals as possible. This made her smirk, which I remember because I couldn't stop staring at her lips, the fullest, reddest, most velveteen kissers I'd ever laid eyes on. 2 glistening scarlet slugs straight out of a hand-painted wartime pin-up. Plump, moist, ripe. That's what my brain saw. My eyes begged to differ. They reported words like withered, dry, cracked. My vision sent news of parched leather stretched taut across the gnarled fangs of a long-dead Egyptian warrior king. But in the same way it rotated the flipped perspective sent by my gravity-ignorant eyes, so too did my brain rework those paperish folds into a vision of Da Vincian grace. I was fucked up. But I wasn't that fucked up. I saw both versions of Casas, clearly and simultaneously. But the beauty of one had my mind ignoring, no. Not ignoring, blocking out the horror of the other. It was only with the hindsight of the following morning my brain realized its mistake. Too late by then. Of course, Casas was full of life. The most beautiful thing I'd seen amongst all objects and individuals. Casas was the face of graveyards, the silence of undisturbed crypts given form. Both of these things were true, although I couldn't perceive her duality clearly until I'd returned from where the little gold pill sent me, after the Morcinema took me on the only trip we ever really take, though it wasn't just her. Was it? I can see the truth of everyone now. Casas, myself, the copulating inebriated creatures I ran screaming past as I fled the party. That's how I know last night was my last night. No more mornings on my horizon because there is no horizon. After I write this I leave and it all ends. I had to smash the mirror. It's a hard enough pill to swallow without the constant reminder. Oh, that's a metaphorical pill. You understand. I meant my messed up situation is almost too messed up to take. The little gold pill wasn't difficult to swallow. That went down easy, both literally in my throat and figuratively as a sales pitch when Casas began her spiel. She promised me that if I wanted to get fucked up, she had something that would fuck me up more than any pill, powder, or even needle prick on the planet, as I'm sure you can gather. She wasn't lying. Last night I laughed it off as typical dealer bravado. I told her the blunt smelled tasty, but I doubted she had anything better than what I'd put in my system already. I didn't put it so eloquently, of course. I was fucked up. What I said was a slurred mess. But because I was fucked up, I can't recall the specific mashed syllables verbatim. The clear memories don't start until after I took the little gold pill. The memories that aren't of Casas. That is, no, Casas I can remember just fine. Any memories of her got filed away crystal clear as the moment they happened, ready to recollect and recall at a moment's notice. I don't think I'll ever forget the husky breaths between her words, how they swayed like the hips of a salsa dancer and shuddered like the sobs of a grieving young mother. The way she moved in her oversized jeans and hoodie will probably be the last thing I see before I go. The mesmerizing flowing twitch of her arms when her supple skeletal hands pulled out a baggie full of little gold pills from the folds. Her eyes too. My obviously absent god. Her eyes. Her fucking eyes. I knew it wasn't booze goggles that put that shimmering in her gaze. Even then, in the moment I found it entrancing, enticing. Afterward, I saw with clarity just how wrong I'd been. How obvious it was that the dancing crimson light where the soft lampshade should have been reflected was a warning. Her dark eyes were the only part of Casas to remain unchanged in either of her simultaneous faces. I'd relived that rouge shimmer in her pupils over and over until I was an old man, if it were my fate to live to be one at least, as the gnawing itch to pick up the card is testament to, though. I definitely fucking won't be. The little golden pill. It was cold, cold as the brief brush of Casas' fingers against my open palm when she dropped it into my hand. She was straight with me. This little golden pill, Morcinema, would kill my soul and send it to the afterlife. Give me a sneak preview. While my living but empty remained here amongst the swirling room and occasionally moaning sweaty half-clothed bodies. Again, I just thought it was dealer bravado. I also wasn't paying attention, while my eyes and my brain were fighting over whether I spoke to a Madonna or Morgiscapi. The useless flesh between my legs was loudly concerned with the mysterious flesh between hers. Since my brain's back was turned, my crotch upped the odds of a go-nowhere drunken encounter by popping the little gold pill into my mouth. "I'll show the hot pillhead chick I'm not chicken shit" was the stupid as fuck male bravado bullshit reasoning. She was smirking again, the light brighter on her glistening lips than it was in the room. The hollow sockets around her sinew-suspended eyes darker than the moonless night sky beyond the busted blinds. "Trust me, Simon, once you're back you won't want to wait long for your second hit. You'll even want to die for it. I'll believe that when I see it." That's what all the hot dealer chicks say about their designer-y Adderall bullshit, is what I wanted to say. That's why I instantly knew something was wrong, because the words that came out my mouth were "there's a light." I heard myself speak, but by the time the sentence finished my words were echoey and I wasn't at the party anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere with a light. That's all there was. Light, and the sensation of falling. There was no transition, you understand? And it's not that I was too fucked up to remember passing out on the couch or something. I didn't see myself fly out of my body. I was talking to the girl with two faces, aware with drunken fucked up dimness that something cold and little and gold was sliding down my throat, and then in less than a blink there was only light. Light and falling. The former was brief, whereas the latter was just the beginning of my nightmare. The light wasn't white. Hollywood's been fucking lying to all of us. It's red. The same malevolent honey-trap scarlet that writhed in Casa's eyes. It wasn't all-encompassing, but it wasn't at the end of a tunnel either. It was in a hole in a ceiling I couldn't see, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't there, aside from the 25 feet circular light I'd just fallen out of. There were no surroundings in this place, if you could even call it a place. The overwhelming totality of the empty void that stretched on forever in all directions except below couldn't even be called blackness. Deep space has a blackness, an absence of light. This was an absence beyond that, an absence of the very emptiness which the darkness of interstellar gulfs represents. An absence so total it cannot contain even observations of itself in the minds of others, an inversion of the potential for abundance. I'd have gone mad thinking about it if it weren't for one fact. In this endless empty non-place, I wanted alone. There were people falling with me. No sooner had I realized that I was plummeting away from the red light than it was blocked from my vision by the silhouette of someone else materializing within it. A man, old and wrinkled. He was naked, screaming, flailing his arms and legs as he tumbled. And when my wits caught up with me, I realized I was too. There was no wind to whistle past me, but I could feel the meat hook wrenching pull my bladder into my gut, the signal from my body that it was hurtling toward the ground at high speed. Soon the man was replaced by two more naked figures above him, and so on. The further I fell from the dwindling light, the more momentum I gained, and the more incoming bodies pirouetted through the air above me. Then my wits caught up with me some more. My neck and ears woke up a bit. I turned to look either side of me, the meat hook in my gut joined by an industrial clamp, when I saw just how many others had arrived alongside me or just before. My ears chimed in at this. If there's no wind you can feel, then what's this roaring? Then I cottoned on. You scream, I scream, we all scream for ice cream, right? Except there was no ice cream, just thousands of us, all free falling toward nowhere near here, God knows what. All howling in absolute bestial unrestrained panic. The roaring in my ears as I fell wasn't wind rushing past me. It was the collective wails of hundreds of thousands of terrified, confused, naked people hurtling through the abyss. I got a flash of Casa's words, of the party, and I realized both that I was suddenly incredibly sober and incredibly fucked. You'll never take another trip like this, Simon. This baby will send you to the fucking afterlife. Total fucking soul death. Feel silly panicking then. In hindsight, the mad, confused terror of the fall was harrowing, but my undoing had only just begun. Once I turned in mid-non-air and saw what I was plummeting towards, I would have passed out if it were possible without a body. As it was, I could only try and somehow use the lungs that shouldn't even be working to scream louder. I'd been falling for a full 10 minutes before another body slammed into me and rolled me over. I think I deliberately not turned to look before that, on one level because I didn't want to see the ground, or worse, no ground, rushing up to meet me. On another because, well, on a deeper level I think I knew. The roaring got louder every minute I fell, and the deepest rumbles and the collective human screams were coming from below. Around and above me were by now millions of hurtling figures. In the seething mass that awaited us all at the end of our descent were more bodies than there's a number high enough to count. The carpet of wailing, naked, clawing people below stretched out further into the darkness than could be seen. They were all of them scratching and rending one another in their fight to stay on the surface, to reach the red light that now twinkled far above like the most distant of deep space stars. Futile, of course, but that doesn't stop them. It won't stop any of us. It's try to make that impossible escape. Or sink. Trust me, you don't want to sink. When I go back, I'm going to do everything in my power not to. I can't express to you how loud the sound of their combined howling was. I don't think it could be quantified. Decibels wouldn't cut it. You'd need a whole new measure. If I was in my physical body, my eardrums would have ruptured for sure. But I wasn't in my physical body. Was I? Oh, I could still feel all right. There weren't fountains of blood gushing from burst ears, but there might as well have been. What with the grinding drill sensation in my skull, I just didn't seem to take damage, for lack of a better term. That's why when I finally crashed into the ocean of flailing human bodies, I got the white flashes of pain as if every bone broke. But none of them actually did. No time to stop and think about that though. Their hands were on me the second I landed. Grabbing, grasping, gripping. They pulled and tugged and hoisted. In all directions I was taken by cold, clammy fingers, unyielding and unbreaking in their quest to pull me down, down beneath the waves of the agonized dead. Fingers in my mouth, hooking my nostrils, pushing themselves up with my jaw and my ribs and my eye sockets as purchase. I was screaming along with them. Panicked beyond comprehension. Brief glimpses of those snarling bodies came to me, lit only by the faint red star in the sky from which more bodies forever fell. But nothing more. The only things I was really aware of were the crushing iron grips all over my naked skin, and the piercing wall of shrieking white noise. I don't know if the frenzied souls trying to submerge me succeeded in the end, or if those above were simply so numerous the idea of a surface on this ocean is merely an illusion. Before I knew it, I was buried beneath dozens, hundreds, thousands of people, all as unclothed and terrified as I was. I don't know how long I sank for, but I knew it was too long. When the panic had subsided enough for me to start fighting my fate, it was long since too late. It felt like I was there for years, entire cycles of the earth round the sun, knowing nothing but the crush of feet from above, and the impotent clawing of hands from below. No light, no heat, no sound. Once you sink deep enough, the bodies are compressed too tightly together for sound to escape. Years of silence while reeking once people slather around you. The immense pressure of the depths slowing movement down to a primordial crawl. Then, when you reach the deepest points, even that stops. That's where you find the long dead. The ones that have given up trying to climb through either madness or despair. I just about sank to their blind domain when there was a sensation. It had been so long in my mind since I'd experienced one that I'd almost forgotten what they were. It was a feeling, a physical sensation beyond the crush of the collective human dead. Cold water on my face. I opened my eyes, not realizing they'd been closed. I winced. There wasn't much light, but there was light nonetheless, and I'd long since become unused to it. There was a face in front of me, a woman's face, a beautiful face, a hideous face, a sculpture and a corpse. Causes. She didn't say much before I left her there at my friend's acquaintance's party. I didn't give her a chance to. So, Simon, what do you think of the afterlife? You've got a lot to look forward to, right? Then I was running. I was running home. All the way. Even though it was so many miles, the sun had long since risen by the time I arrived. It wasn't her grin that made me run, or the way that devilish scarlet shimmer glimmered brighter than ever in her dark eyes. It wasn't that I could see, and realized I had always been able to see, the duality in her nature. The two faces. One beautiful, one dead. That whatever the entity known as Casus has to ensnare her, its victims. It wasn't even my hands and forearms. How I looked down in horror to see them dark brown with old bruises all shaped like finger marks and handprints that proved my Morsen trip was no trip at all. It wasn't even what the Morsenema showed me. Truth be told, I didn't even really unpack that until I was already home. It's what I could see when I came back from the trip. I see everyone differently now, dualistically, every single person. It's not just Casus, she's something different entirely. Although I only know that because she's the same in my pre-Morsenema memories. Everyone else I remember as they're supposed to look when I think back on my life before Casus' little gold pill. But since I took it, I see their other face, too. Every face I see has a grotesque, hideous counterpart, even my own. That's why I smashed my mirror. I couldn't take that thing looking back at me every time I walked by. I don't know what they are, but I know seeing them slathering up against one another in the party backroom was enough to make me run screaming. I could hear Casus laughing, too. Of course she was. She'd won. I could see the world as she saw it now. The truth of who we are. The condition our souls are in. I'm guessing that's what it is. At least, I walked past a kid on my way home, on their early morning paper route, and theirs wasn't nearly as harrowing. So it makes sense. I don't want to describe them to you. The second faces, if you could see the truth of what you are in the eyes of higher beings, you'd struggle to find a reason to carry on. If the despair didn't take you, the madness would. You're better off not knowing how truly ugly we really are, and how utterly too late it is to change it. I think that's why all that awaits us is sinking, is the crush, one more human on the pile. Right, we don't even get something as direct and acknowledging of our existence as eternal torture. Convincing myself it was just a bad trip was moot. The bruises hurt like hell. There was no explaining that, especially since the more cinema trip had only taken about 5 minutes. I was also stone cold sober. Going from as fucked up as I was to full sobriety in that short a time is biologically impossible. I think I found a card with Casa's name and a number on it in my pocket. I'm going to call her. I can't take the burden of this knowledge. Better to meet my fate head on, right? Besides, I can't live like this. Not now I can see the truth of what we are, of what I am. Better to spend eternity forever fighting to reach the surface than another day fearing bumping into the thousand-eyed pustulous creature sharing my pervy neighbor's face. At least the sinking is pure. The crush is simple. The struggle is clean, not like us. Oh God, why am I thinking like this? I need to go. I think something is happening to me. I don't want to call Casas. Like I said, she's not human, although I don't think that's really such a dirty thing right now. Just being honest, I couldn't find any mention of her save one. There was a digital copy of an old newspaper from 1993. A local guy about my age had broken into a family home. He'd done something unspeakable to the residents, husband, wife, the two. Well, you get the picture. Police got him, and when they took him down he was, according to the paper, raving about a girl, a beautiful girl that looked like a corpse, a girl named Casas. Her card's on the table. It's taunting me, begging me to call her. I don't know what to do. What if I'm supposed to not call her? What if she wants me not to call? What if she's counting on my new perspective breaking me, making me do some unspeakable? What if that's what happened in 1993? Maybe if I call, if I go back to the sea of bodies one last time, I can make sense of it all. No, yes, what's happening? Help. I'm Filipino, and our culture is heavily influenced by the creatures that lurk in the dark. When I was 3, my family migrated to the US. We lived a comfortable life, and I had a happy childhood. My parents were a bit superstitious, so we had a few strange traditions, and they would always tell me stories about the Capre, Aswangs, Mananangals, Tikbalangs, Tianaks, and the like. Filipino monsters always seemed scarier to me than Western ones. It might be because whenever my parents talked about them, they made it sound like they had first-hand experiences with the creatures. They probably just did it for dramatic effect. We moved back to the Philippines when my grandmother got sick. I was only 16 at the time, and I had to readjust to a new way of living. She died 3 years after we moved there, but we decided to stay. My grandmother lived in the province, so everything was completely different from what I was used to. My neighbors would always go back into their homes before dark. There were no town curfews set in place, but they did it anyway. I was taught to say tapai po anytime I passed by an anthill or a big tree. Whenever my friend visited, he would yell tau po at the door. We weren't allowed to sweep the floor at night. Basically, there was a long list of things we should or shouldn't do. I never really understood why everyone found these things so important. I just followed along out of respect, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself a believer. So when I finally moved to the city for college, I was more than ready to live a life without all the weird superstitious beliefs. That was a few years ago. I recently graduated with a degree in marketing. I also met my fiancée, Myra, in college, and I was finally ready to take her home to meet the family. I had no debt, and I already had a job lined up for when I got back to the city. Life was good. Are you sure they're gonna like me? My fiancé asked as we were driving to the province. They're going to love you, baby. There's nothing not to love, I reassured her. She gave me a soft smile in return. Myra was born and raised in the Philippines. She's never even left the country. We were extremely different, considering I was pretty westernized. We disagreed on a lot of things in the beginning, but we eventually found some middle ground as we got to learn about each other more. She was more on the conservative side, so a lot of the things I was used to bothered her. Let's just say when she found out I watched porn, there was a lot of screaming, and not the good kind. Maybe a bit of the good kind when the fight ended, but we got past all that and got to a pretty good place. I was proud of how much our relationship grew. There were a few other strange things about her, but I didn't really mind too much. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she'd go to the bathroom for a half hour or so. I rarely noticed her get up, but when I did, she would just tell me she had stomach problems. Another thing was how she always wore this weird necklace. She never took it off, not even in the shower or when she went to sleep. But those were just little things I eventually got over. "We're here," I said as I parked the car. I unloaded our luggage and headed towards the door of my grandparents' house. My mother greeted me and my father took our bags inside. "Louis, who's this?" my mom inquired upon seeing Myra behind me. "Ma, this is Myra, and we have something important to tell you, but we'll need the rest of the family too," I said eagerly. Myra smiled at her and gave her a small wave. "It's nice to meet you, ma'am." For some reason, my mom didn't look so pleased. She pulled me inside and whispered, "I don't like her, Anak. She has no manners." "What are you talking about? She just got here and you haven't even gotten to know her yet." "Anak, listen to me. That woman will bring nothing but misfortune to us all. I can't believe you're saying all this right now. At least give her a chance." I walked toward Myra, took her hand, and practically stormed into the house. My whole family was there. My father, brothers, sister, grandfather, cousins, and my aunts and uncles. They all looked surprised to see me drag some unfamiliar woman into the house. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Myra. She's my fiancée," I announced. My announcement received mixed reactions, mostly confusion. My sister, Clara, was the first one to speak up. She plastered on a huge grin and said, "Well, welcome to the family." Clara walked over to Myra and intended to give her a hug but was stopped short. "I'm sorry, I'm not too big on physical contact, what with COVID, monkeypox, and all that, but I appreciate the gesture," Myra stated and gave her a smile instead. "Oh, yeah, totally." Everyone else followed suit with their congratulations and we ended the day with a family dinner. We had some champagne to celebrate the news of our engagement as well. My mother remained quiet the whole time, but we had a good time nonetheless. At around 3:15 that night, Myra had gone to the bathroom again at some point. I tried to go back to sleep, but I heard a strange fluttering noise in the backyard. I went outside to investigate. I know, big horror movie trope. The Asian dude goes somewhere alone and dies first, but my life wasn't a movie, so I didn't see the harm. I saw Myra standing behind a wall. It looked like she was observing something. I inched closer to see what she was staring at. What I saw would forever be burned into my memory, like hot iron branding a mark right onto the surface of my brain. I thought it was a chopped up log or something at first, but then I saw the legs, and it started to move ever so slightly. It was the lower half of a human body. I nearly screamed at the sight, but Myra saw me and shoved her hand onto my mouth. She gestured to me to go back inside and locked the door behind us. Once we were inside, she put a finger to her lips as if to say quiet. She disappeared into the kitchen to grab me a glass of water and helped me walk back into the bedroom. "Louis, I need you to listen very carefully. What you just saw, you weren't supposed to see that, but there are creatures far beyond our understanding that share this world with us. Sometimes they walk this earth like they're one of our own," Myra explained to me as I occupied myself with drinking from my glass. "Look, the province. It's different here. The culture is heavily influenced by superstition. A lot of that culture is lost in the city. It's safer there because of the number of people and the lack of belief. While being superstitious can help the people in the province in some way, since they know how to ward them off. Their belief is also what gives these creatures power," she continued. "So, what was that thing?" I asked her, still in shock from the sight I had seen earlier. "I think you know. Your parents told you, right? The stories of beautiful women who turn into monsters at night. The ones whose bodies split in half, the upper half going off to feed on its prey. Mananangal. Yes, they're one of the more dangerous ones, especially to people like us. We're about to be newlyweds. They usually feed on pregnant women and newlyweds, but they're not limited to that. Sometimes it could just be someone who fell asleep with their window open. Why newlyweds? Pregnant women make more sense, I guess. I know monsters tend to like fetuses. I'm not sure. There are a lot of different iterations. One of the more popular ones states that they were left at the altar, so they seek out new grooms or grooms-to-be. I think that's why your mother wasn't too keen on the idea of us getting married. She knows who the Mananangal is, probably trying to protect it. Why would she try to protect one? They're monsters. Not really. It's more complicated than that. You see, they're human at first, or at their core would be more accurate. It's kind of like a parasite or an infection." "What do you mean?" "Legend says there's a chick inside of a Mananangal. It's created inside another Mananangal, and given to women to eat to pass on the infection. How do you kill one? It's not that easy. You can't kill the actual Mananangle because the chick would still be alive. You can, however, get rid of the chick and therefore get rid of the infection. But again, not that easy. So we just have to find out who it is and get rid of the chick. If it's someone your mother knows, then she probably knows this method, but hasn't been able to execute it. You have to catch the upper half of the Mananangle, tie it upside down to a tree, and make it vomit out the chick. I can see why she hasn't been able to do it yet, but with the proper help and materials, she can probably pull it off. Do you have the proper materials? Well, not yet, but I can gather them. I'll need help from an albulario and maybe 2 other people. I had a difficult time processing all this information. Honestly, I couldn't even believe I was having this conversation. I thought I would just wake up the next day and this would have all just been some terrible nightmare. But it wasn't. The next day, right after breakfast, Myra was asking around about an albulario, some sort of witch doctor who practices folk healing. My mom was still avoiding me. I almost wanted to go right up to her face and tell her that I knew her secret, but Myra told me I should hold off on telling my mom until she's fixed the problem. I know that my mother was just trying to protect me, but I couldn't get over the fact she was also trying to protect this thing. By midnight, we were staking out in a little shed we had in the backyard to reveal the identity of the Mananangle. I thought I was shocked the first time, but to say I was unprepared for what I saw tonight would be an understatement. Who is that? Do you know her? Myra asked me. Yes, it's my grandmother. I'm Filipino, and our culture is heavily influenced by the creatures that lurk in the dark. Part 2, series. Hey, guys, it's been a few days since my first post, and I'm writing now because we've hit a wall. Some of you gave a few suggestions on how to kill a Mananangle, but Myra said most of them don't work. I'm also not sure I want to kill my grandmother because she apparently was never dead. I'll explain this later. After we found out the identity of the Mananangle, we decided to go through with our first plan of expelling the chick and possibly end Lola's misery. Myra said she needed a few more days because we hadn't found an albulario yet that time. She'd already gathered most of the materials she needed: thick rope that's been steeped in vinegar for 13 days, unrefined sea salt, water that's been blessed by a priest, and some garlic, just ordinary garlic. We also needed to find a bali tree and douse it in the holy water. A lot of you have asked why Myra knows so much. Apparently, she's been doing this for years. When she was born, she was given a gift to be able to see things normal people could not. She refers to it as her third eye. According to her, everybody has one, but they're normally closed. She was born with her third eye opened. Her parents figured this out when she was a child, so they gave her an anting to wear for protection against evil spirits. It's the weird necklace I was talking about in my first post. It's hard to miss, since it looks unusual. It's why my mother was suspicious of her when they met. My mother has always been the superstitious one in the family. Her siblings didn't really care much for that sort of thing, so they didn't understand the significance of Myra's necklace. As for why Myra disappears in the middle of the night, she explained that she was trying to protect me. She can sense negative energy, so whenever she sensed a being with evil intentions, she would perform rituals to exorcise them. I'm sure you know sleepers are familiar with the witching hour, hence why she did this at specific hours during the night. She felt like she had an obligation to protect those around her, since she's been blessed with this gift. I told her other people are not her responsibility, and she responded with something along the lines of, "It's my God-given purpose." I've been an atheist for years now, but I respect other people's beliefs, so I decided not to argue with her on that. Now that I've answered all your burning questions about Myra, I'll get back to my update. I'm sure you're all dying to know about my grandmother. After we had everything we needed, albulario included, all that was left was the ritual. Remember my friend who would say taupo whenever he visited? Turns out he's pretty superstitious, so when I asked him to help us catch a Mananangle, he didn't even hesitate. He seemed excited. We'll call him Juan, since he asked me not to reveal his identity here. Lying in Juan's task was difficult. We were supposed to catch the upper half of Lola's body. I'd never even gone hunting before, so I wasn't too sure if I'd be able to capture a flying monster. Myra assured me that the sea salt and garlic would weaken her and we'd just have to tie her up with the vinegar-steeped rope. Yes, just tie up a Mananangle upside down on some supposedly magical tree. Sounds simple enough, right? We used blood to lure my grandmother to a clearing by the bali tree. I heard what sounded like humongous wings flapping around and I knew what I had to do. Seeing her like that again was heartbreaking. Lola used to have such a warm and welcoming face, but now it was distorted and almost didn't even look like her. Her complexion was almost gray. Her eyes were bloodshot and her pupils were dilated. The veins in her face were black and protruding, as if they could pop out and come alive at any moment. Her mouth looked too big for her face, with long and razor-sharp teeth. The skin around her mouth was red, like it had been irritated from stretching too far beyond it was supposed to. Her wings looked like that of a bat's, but much, much bigger. At the end of her torso, I could see her gut spilling out, barely hanging on to the rest of her. Even from the sky, I could smell this horrible stench coming from her. It was a mixture of a metallic scent, presumably the blood of her victims, and rot. I didn't want to look, but I had a job to do. As she descended, I threw the sea salt and crushed garlic mixture at her and she fell to the ground. And I quickly worked on tying her up. Her screams were horrific. It was a combination of something deep and raspy as well as her own voice. She looked at me and I thought I saw a moment of recognition in her eyes. "Please, Apo, do not let them do this to me," my grandmother pleaded. "I'm sorry, Lola, it has to be done," I said weakly, her face contorted with rage. Terrible, horrendous rage that I could feel reverberating throughout my entire body. It was unnerving. "Wala ka talagang kwenta," she snarled at me. For the non-Filipinos reading this, she basically called me a worthless piece of shit. I tried to focus on the task at hand instead. We hoisted her upside down on the tree as she screeched. She would alternate between sounding helpless and sounding completely deranged. Her unsettling behavior combined with the revolting scent made me sick, but I had to help her. The albulario walked toward us, carrying some concoction he had cooked up to supposedly make my grandmother vomit out the chick. "Please, stop," a familiar voice yelled out, interrupting our ritual. It was my mom. She was running toward us, clearly out of breath. She was never very athletic. "If you do this, you will kill her," Ma explained. "Kill her? I thought she'd been dead for years and somehow got turned into this monster," I said, confused. "You don't understand, Anak. You're Lola. She was very sick. I did what I had to do." My mother was screaming at this point. "Ma, what are you saying? The chick, it healed her. If you do this, she'll just be human again. She'll just be sick again. She won't survive." Ma then went on to explain how she and her siblings faked my grandmother's death. "The chick has been passed down to generations as a family heirloom. Lola was never interested in becoming a Manananggal, but she kept it for future generations. I don't really understand her reasons for this. But then again, I don't understand a lot of the things people do in the province. When Lola got sick, they urged her to eat the chick to regain her strength. She refused, saying she wanted to die as a human being, that she didn't want to mess with that kind of black magic. But her children were not ready to let her go, so they forced her to eat it. My mother was the only one who knew about the chick at first, since it was to be passed down to her, as she was the firstborn daughter. When she told her siblings she knew of a way to save their mother, they told her to do whatever it took. The grown-ups were all in on it. They told everyone in town that my grandmother had died. To avoid suspicion, they hid her in my uncle's house during the day and allowed her to go off to feed at night. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt betrayed. The family I had known and loved were not the people I thought they were. They almost seemed more terrifying than the monster hanging by the tree. For context, all our houses shared the same backyard, and she would leave the lower half of her body there when she went out to hunt. Filipinos don't normally leave their family home, but as my uncles and aunts had more children, it got too cramped. They decided on a compromise and built houses on the same property instead. Lola had a closed casket funeral, except there was nothing in there. Me, my siblings, and my cousins had no idea. At the time, we just thought her condition had rendered her corpse to look unpresentable. We didn't know we were mourning an empty coffin. I was angry, hurt, and disgusted. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do. There was a way to save her and so I did," my mother said. "Save her? You didn't fucking save her. You blatantly went against her wishes." I yelled back, "Language, Anak, screw that. You're all fucking sick in the head." Lyra decided to chime in and try to calm me down. "Louis, I think we should save this for another night. Your mother might just need time to grieve and accept the situation. Are you actually siding with her on this?" I couldn't believe what she was saying. We already have everything we need, and catching a Manananggal isn't exactly a walk in the park. I'm not siding with her. I just understand what it's like to lose a loved one. Just give her more time. "Okay," I looked at her with disgust. "I know what it's like to lose a loved one, but there is absolutely no justifiable reason for what my mother and her siblings did to my grandmother. If you freaks want to let this abomination go free and feed on innocent people, I'm not going to be a part of it." I stormed out of there. I don't know what they did with the Manananggal, but I'm assuming they didn't go through with the ritual. I locked myself in my bedroom that night and haven't spoken to anyone since. Myra has been trying to talk to me, but I didn't want to see her. She would stand outside the door and ask me to let her in so we could talk. I never responded to her. I'll leave some food here in case you're hungry. When you're ready to talk, just let me know, she said. I heard her set a tray down on the floor and walk away. I'm not sure what I should do at this point. Am I overreacting? Am I being needlessly difficult? Should I just let Lola be a man and angle? My fiance died in a tragic accident a month before our wedding. But it may have been a blessing. My fiance died a month before our wedding date. It was the kind of freak accident that you would see on Final Destination. And the injuries she received were not just, of course, fatal, but disfiguring as well. I had to identify her body, and she was unrecognizable from the waist up. The only reference I had to confirm her identity was a tattoo she had on the outside of her right thigh. 2 butterflies with their wings interlocked. The butterflies were meant to represent us. She got it the day after we announced our engagement. I had stood looking over the ruin of her body, marveling at the fact that this collection of organs and skin and blood had once been my beloved. She had survived so much only to be brought down by a tragic chain of events, and I couldn't help but think of a quote from Terry Pratchett. When someone is saved from certain death by a strange concatenation of circumstances, they say that's a miracle. But of course, if someone is killed by a freak chain of events, the oil spilled just there, the safety fence broken just there, that must also be a miracle. Just because it's not nice doesn't mean it's not miraculous. It was indeed miraculous, a horrible miracle devised by an insane God. And of course I was sad. She had been a lovely woman and I had loved her very much. But her death had solved an awkward predicament I'd been mulling over for a while. I had been wondering how I could call the wedding off. Before I go any further, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. I know what people are like, and I know everyone reading this will probably assume I orchestrated her death. I did not. I loved her, fervently once upon a time, more absently in the past years. And I had no wish for her to die. I just didn't want to marry her, for reasons I will explain presently. But her death was the result of such an odd set of circumstances that anyone who could have plotted and put that plan into action would have to be a god themselves. It happened like this. My fiancée, I will call her M for the purposes of this tale, was attending a final wedding dress fitting. I of course had not seen the dress, but I saw the shreds of the fabric clinging to her wounds on the day I was called to identify her. It was completely her, wispy and sparkling and floaty, so very her. Anyway, it transpired that the boutique she was purchasing the dress from had only 1 member of staff in attendance that day, and whilst ordinarily she would have had people to help her into the dress, the 1 staff member had to leave him in order to take care of other business. Before she had left, she had locked the shop door so nobody would be able to come in whilst she was gone. Eager to try on her wedding dress, M had apparently attempted to put it on alone. Most of the following events have been put together by eyewitnesses, the coroner, and CCTV footage. But it appears that M, my sweet, clumsy bride, had somehow gotten stuck in the dress. It was a tricky piece of clothing, according to the traumatized shop assistant, with a lace-up corset back and a number of ties and straps besides. Tangled in the confines of the dress, hands over her head and face covered, M had stumbled from the changing room seeking help. The dress was quite heavy, despite its floaty appearance, and it's possible she panicked. The CCTV shows her bumping into a side table and falling over, the vase on the table toppling and a considerable amount of water tipping onto the dress fabric. The inquest that followed her death suggested that the water on the fabric over her face would have produced a suffocating effect, like waterboarding, and from her struggles to free herself it was clear she was in some distress. It was heartbreaking to watch. That's not what killed her, however. M had managed to get herself into a sitting position and, using her arms, presumably get the wet material off her face. She always was a fighter. From there, she managed to get to her feet somehow, flopping around like a salmon until she was upright, and make her way into the main room of the boutique looking for assistance. She did find her way to the door, but it was locked. Of course, she had to have been exhausted by then. She tottered here and there, a zigzag path of despair that the soulless eye of the camera recorded, and by some horrible miracle managed to bump into the full-length mirror angled against the wall. M wasn't a heavy woman, but she fell heavily, and the mirror shattered into a multitude of potentially deadly shards which flew everywhere. Everyone watching the footage winced in unison. I recall, as the jagged glass exploded around her, the mirror shards didn't kill her either. On the contrary, They freed her. The fabric of the dress got sliced in such a way she was able to push her face free. And although she couldn't be heard gasping for air, she could be seen gulping lungfuls of it. There was blood on the dress, and it was ruined, but such was her relief that she was seen to smile. Lying there on her back in the abandoned boutique surrounded by the jagged glitter of the destroyed mirror, she checked her arms and ran her newly released hands over her face and seemed to find no drastic injuries, which the inquest somehow managed to confirm. We saw her laugh then. She always had the most exuberant laugh, very infectious. Her relief was greater than the demise of the dress, and no doubt she was rehearsing the story of what had occurred in order to report back to me later. Em always had a talent at looking on the bright side and at recounting tales of her misadventures in the most amusing way possible. It might have ended there. A funny anecdote of what happened to her on the day of her final dress fitting. A story we might have told our children. But here is where the miracle occurred. It was a bright, sunny day. The boutique was coincidentally positioned so that it got the full benefit of the natural light. And somehow, through some bizarre twist of fate, the sunshine happened to fall upon a large mirror shard in such a way that it reflected back into the eyes of a passing lorry driver. The poor man approached me at Em's funeral. He had not recovered from his part in her death. He apologized to me over and over, but I could not accept any apologies from him. It had been an accident, a terrible, miraculous accident, and he had had as much control over it as Em had had over her irrepressible laughter. Temporarily blinded, the driver had hit another car, and upon feeling the impact had tried to swerve. As a result, the huge vehicle had crashed through the storefront, mowing down the white-clad mannequins in the window, and had not stopped its momentum until its front wheels had crushed the life from my fiancée. So there it is. Even if I had wanted her dead, which I hadn't, there is no way on earth I could have organized such a series of events. It may be obvious from my recounting of her personality that I had some affection for her. I did. She was warm and funny and sweet. Everyone loved her. So why did I not want to marry her? That is the tricky part. Many of you will hate me for what I'm about to say, and I won't blame you one bit. I have never claimed to be a good person, and the fact that Em fell in love with me at all is a miracle in itself. I did not deserve her. When I met him, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Perfectly made, flawless complexion, sparkling eyes, and, it goes without saying, the most amazing tits. Her eyes were the first to suffer. Poor Em had always joked that she had unlucky disease and that it was contagious. She was clumsy, true, but that didn't account for both her parents dying in a freak accident as unlikely as the one that had ended her, as well as a multitude of other misfortunes. Had she not been such a sunny soul, I doubt her spirit could have survived such horrendous setbacks. But like I said, she was a fighter. Be careful. She had always said to me, only half joking, I might infect you, and although she never infected me in the literal sense, I was affected by her symptoms. She lost one of her sparkling eyes to a tumor. She said it went against her luck to have caught the tumor early enough for it to be removed. But she also said that even tragedies can have their high points. After all, Romeo and Juliet may have died, but at least they had married before that. Em got a replacement glass eye. It matched the original very well, but I always knew it wasn't real. That wasn't too much of a problem in itself, as long as I didn't think about it too much. But then came the news that she had breast cancer, and a double mastectomy took away both of those amazing assets. Her hair fell out from the chemotherapy, but it grew back. Her breasts did not, and because her face was still beautiful, I could almost ignore the twin scars on her chest. Almost. She talked about implants as if it were a happy daydream, and I was only too glad to humor her. But somehow, she never seemed too bothered about replacing her breast. I thought she could have done that for me. The final straw came when it was discovered that the tumor she had lost in Ida had returned and poked its evil little fingers into her face. She lost part of her face then. Too much? In my opinion, the right side of her face remained flawless, but the left side, it reminded me of childhood nightmares. I hated to look at it. I never told her as much. I acted my role well, but I only ever kissed the good side of her face from there on. I know you will all be judging me now, but imagine your own loved one with half their formerly lovely face transformed into a mask of scar tissue and twisted flesh. It looked like a piece of fruit with a section taken out, the section replaced by a gnarled and warped knot of toughened skin. Would you eat that fruit? I still loved her, but I did not desire her anymore. I participated in the wedding plans, but my heart was not in it. I could not imagine lifting the veil to kiss my bride and seeing that horror beneath. It was a travesty. Her death was a tragedy, but it also solved my problem. I had not wanted to hurt her, And now I would not. I was released. Her family wanted an open casket funeral. I was against it, of course. But they were paying. I couldn't imagine the work the mortuary team would have to do to render M palatable for public viewing. But when I went to see the final results the day before the funeral, I was astonished. They had performed miracles, working from old photos. They had pieced my fiancée back together in a process that must have been as harrowing as it was painstaking. In fact, they had done so well they had restored her back to her former beauty. Before the cancer had sunk its malignant teeth into her perfect flesh, her face was flawless. The scar tissue and gnarled skin on the left side had been reconstructed so skillfully she looked the way she had done the day I had met her. And under the demure bosom of her funeral gown, above her folded hands, 2 rounded domes rose where her breasts had once been. She was breathtaking again, and I fell in love with her all over again. I know you will think me insane and perverse, but I couldn't bear to think of that perfection being lowered into a hole and covered in dirt to rot underground. I had to take her back. I won't go into details. It wasn't an easy job breaking into the funeral home and stealing her corpse, but I managed it. She was heavier in death than she had been in life, as if the mere act of being alive had imbued some buoyancy in her that death had taken away. But it was worth it. I had my beautiful M back in our home again. For however long she lasted, the day of her funeral would have been the day of our wedding. I went to the church with a suitably long face and looked appropriately horrified when the news of her missing body spread. I even managed to break down so convincingly I was escorted home. I turned down offers of company by stating that I needed to be alone, all the while knowing that M was lying upstairs in what would have been in our marital bed even as I turned well-wishers away from our door. In fact, I couldn't wait to be upstairs with my love again and consummate our displaced wedding. But here's the thing, when I dashed upstairs, removing my stuffy suit as I went, I found that the bed was empty, the covers were thrown back, and there were some unsavory-looking stains on the white sheets that I did not want to examine too closely. But no M. I backed out of the room, doing my shirt back up as I went, and closed the bedroom door. I can't be sure, but I think I saw that the door to the walk-in closet was slightly ajar, and I was certain I had slid it fully closed earlier after fetching my suit. As I write this, I am sitting downstairs, listening to heavy thuds coming from the bedroom. Whoever is up there seems to be bumping into a lot of things. I know M was clumsy in life, but I also know that undertakers use spiked eye caps in order to keep the eyes of a corpse closed. And M had only one good eye to begin with. The thumps do seem to be getting closer to where I judged the door to be, though. I think I've made a terrible mistake. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.